Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by the Arizona Office of Tourism. This spring, follow your favorite baseball teams to Arizona for Cactus League spring training. Amazing weather and landscapes, exciting outdoor adventure, incredible food. Arizona is the perfect home base for baseball fans. Plan your spring training getaway at visitarizona.com/spring training. Yes, that's visitarizona.com/spring training. And now here's our show.
Oh, we hail from Rockford, Illinois, just across the line. We're not too young, we're not too old, in fact, we're in our prime. Oh, we hit the ball with might and main, and fielding we are fast. We are the Rockford Ball Club, we always dress in class, oh yes we are. Oh yes we are, the Rockford baseball team.
These feminine phenoms play in the All-American Girls Baseball League, which keeps the turnstiles clicking in the Loop's 8 Midwest cities: South Bend, Fort Wayne, Peoria, Rockford, Kenosha, Grand Rapids, and Kalamazoo. Look close, folks. This is not softball, but real Major League-type baseball, and managed by former Major League stars, such as Jimmy Fox.
Jimmy Fox, too old to be drafted and long past his prime, found another job in baseball as a coach in the brand new All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. The league was the creation of Philip Wrigley, the chewing gum king who owned the Cubs and who hoped to keep baseball alive in the small Midwestern cities that were losing their minor league teams to the war.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well now, how is it going, everybody? My name is Tim Hanlon, and I appreciate your finding our little show, which we, of course, call Good Seats Still Available. It's our curious little podcast journey each and every week, if you can believe it, oh my God, into what used to be in professional sports. And we are pleased and privileged to finally get an opportunity, an excuse to go back into a curiosity that we've only barely scratched the surface of. And our guest this week, Anika Orrock, will be our excuse to do so as we get into more of the incredible story of the incredible women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, which just so happens to be the name of the new book by our guest this week, Anika Orrock. It is available from our friends at Chronicle Books. It is, depending on when you're listening to this episode, it drops on March the 10th. We're dropping this episode, I believe, the week before that, on the 3rd. The Kindle version will be available on Amazon as of this day, the 3rd of March, when we drop this little show. But if you want to get a hard copy of this book, pre-order it on Amazon.com, wherever you find good books. Or, of course, if you're listening from the 10th onward, it is available now. Don't wait, run, don't walk for a copy of this book. And I know I tout a lot of all the great works that our various guests have peddled over the years on this show, but this one rises absolutely to the top, and very quickly. It is called, again, The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And Anika is an artist and a graphic designer by trade, and it is in that form that this book is. It is historically accurate, it is meticulous in its research, but it doesn't have sort of that chore sort of feeling to it, right? With most, nonfiction books of any kind, sports or history related or whatever. It is accessible to audiences young and old alike. And I guarantee you will find, and we'll have a whole bunch of sort of examples of the design of this book on our website, of course, for this episode at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode with Anika, and you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. And I can barely sort of convey just how fun a read this is, how historically accurate it is, and it's a wonder to ingest. It's hardly reading. It is reading, of course. It's chock full of great quotes directly from the players and the personnel that were involved, whether it was direct interviews that Anika did, or through second or third party sources, through historical research. I mean, there's just reenactments of players who are on TV shows like What's My Line in this book. There are graphical depictions and recreations of various stories, both positive and not so positive in this book. There are maps and logos and sort of graphical depictions of sort of what was going on at the time. There's, the lead up into the, declaring World War, America's involvement in World War II, the sort of the starting gun, if you will, for this league being born, among other things. And just fascinating stuff. It's a delight to read, and I wouldn't even call it reading. It's just to enjoy, frankly. It's graphical design. It's a little bit of sort of cartoon-like presentation, but all of it extremely historically accurate. And you will learn a whole bunch of stuff, and it will not feel like learning, I guarantee you. Again, it's called The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. I dare you to say it. I think this has been the bane of every baseball fan and historical pundit out there, to say the name of this league quickly without screwing it up. But I just did that now, didn't I? But the book, again, is called The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, or if you really want to get cute, the AAGPBL. There you go. That's the focus of our conversation with our guest this week. Anika Orrock, and she's a tremendous interview, and the book is, if not equally, if not more so, intriguing. And I cannot stress enough how fun this book is, and a dynamite read. And make sure you get yourself a copy the minute you finish listening to this episode. Coming up in just a couple of moments with Anika Orrock. Before we get there, of course, we want to say thank you to at least one of our sponsors. And this week, we spin the dial, and where does it land? Yes, it's our friends at sportshistorycollectibles.com. Dean Mitchell and pals in San Diego, the proprietors of sportshistorycollectibles.com, where, of course, we've got a promo code for you. It's Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at sportshistorycollectibles.com for 15% off all of your purchases when you go there early and often. And just about every league, every sport, every remembrance in the realm of pro sports history, minor league, major league, you name the sport. It goes from world team tennis to major indoor lacrosse league to all kinds of baseball leagues, all kinds of football leagues, all kinds of soccer leagues, even Olympics and golf and tennis and all these other things. All of them, it's a well-lit version, if you will, a more curated and quality sort of setup of great stuff that, is beyond sort of the pale, shall we say, that you would normally find in sort of your more sort of pedestrian places like eBay and that kind of stuff. Dean goes well out of his way, not only to curate great stuff available for you to purchase, but also he just goes completely overboard in photographing these things to make them come alive and just they're just a wonder just to browse through, even if you don't buy anything. But once you start browsing, you will get mesmerized by a bunch of things. And if there's a team or a league or a sport or something from your past that you're intrigued by, guess what? You're probably going to get lulled into to making a purchase or two. And when you do, it's probably not a matter of if, it's really kind of a matter of when. You want to make sure that when you go to sportshistorycollectibles.com, you use the promo code. And what is that promo code? One more time. Yep. Good Seats. 15% off all of your purchases. Again, sportshistorycollectibles.com. Promo code Good Seats. 15% off. Thank you, Dean. And thank you, friends, for giving them a try. You will, as they say, not be disappointed. And hopefully you will not be disappointed in our coming conversation coming up in mere seconds now with our new pal, Anika Orrock, as we talk about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It is a fascinating story. You all know that, but the book is equally intriguing, and I look forward to presenting this chat with you coming up right now. Well, so give our audience some background then on perhaps what led you to do this book. This is your first directly authored book on your own, correct?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I've previously done a couple of little self-published ventures just of my baseball-inspired illustrations and art and cartoons. But this is definitely my first real deal.
But you're in your Twitter profile, right? You self-proclaim yourself as a baseball nerd. So In the most gentle and loving terms. Can you explain sort of that? So where does your love for the game of baseball sort of emanate from? And then maybe a little bit about your professional life / career and how the two have melded. And then we'll get into the specific story of this particular work.
Sure. Well, I will say I'm not exactly sure what constitutes as a baseball nerd, but I think there are several factions or departments of that. So let me be clear to anyone who might possibly approach me on the matter that I am in no way a numbers nerd, which is probably counterintuitive to any baseball fan. I couldn't tell you the numbers, the stats, the dates of just about anything. And I am somewhat up to date on baseball news, contemporary baseball news, only out of interest. But as far as the nerdness goes, it definitely is all in baseball history and stories and just the legend and sort of sentimental aspect, I guess you could say, or, the parts that are involved in American history or that American history is made from, I guess. But that all starts with my grandfather for me, and my grandparents. My grandfather was a columnist, kind of a humor life storytelling columnist. So I guess the storytelling aspect comes from that. For 35 years, he wrote a daily column in the Bay Area, and he loved baseball. I think he played a bit in college, but I guess I also take after him in the fact that I'm not very athletically inclined. So while I love baseball, I definitely couldn't play much of it other than like at family picnics and things like that. And he was also a cartoonist at one point. So I guess I got my interest in that from him as well. But I spent all my summers and a lot of weekends with my grandparents in California. My parents moved to Utah when I was a kid because they both worked for the airlines. So I actually got to spend more time with my family in the Bay Area than with any family we had in Utah or, just because my parents would put me on an airplane at 5 years old. I'd travel by myself and my grandparents would be waiting for me on the other end. And they were big baseball fans. They both moved to San Francisco right before the Giants came. And my grandfather actually grew up in Napa. And his father played and also managed in, I guess, what would be the equivalent of a AAA team to the Pacific Coast League, Vallejo City Ball Club. So it was always just in the blood, I guess, and particularly San Francisco baseball. And I grew up listening to games with them, and I loved baseball before I think I really even knew what it was or understood the game anyway. I loved the sound of it. I loved being with my grandparents on the deck or in the den with the screen door open in the summer. And I loved hearing them talk about it, even though sometimes, my grandpa would be ranting and, God, boy, you never walked the leadoff guy. What the hell? And I never really knew what he was ranting about, but I just loved it. And then I finally, as I got older, started to understand the game and the stories behind it. And it's just always been there, that love, I guess.
Well, it almost sounds like a soundtrack of a lot of your childhood in many respects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I'm lucky. I think most fans are endeared to the announcer they grew up with. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I'm very lucky in that the announcers I grew up hearing were Lon Simmons and Russ Hodges. And then right around the time that I started to really love baseball in general and understood it was when John Miller came to town. And those are some of the greatest voices in baseball and greatest storytellers, the ability, kind of like Vin Scully too, the ability to tell a story, interjecting story with the game and turning the whole game into a story sort of, and building excitement and making it exciting when it's not, all those things. I kind of wonder if I would really love baseball as much as I do if they hadn't been calling the games, because they built stories in my mind, and it kind of added to that whole aspect of baseball for me. So I feel very lucky in that sense.
Well, certainly radio has always been this sort of theater of the mind, right? And baseball is probably highest order of most fledgling sportscasters' dreams, because it is, and we've talked to people like John Sterling and other people who have done multiple sports, Bob Carpenter. When you're getting started, you'll take any gig, right? But most, not all, but most tend to want to elevate and get to sort of that promised land of baseball, because it is, it's long, it's more breathable a sport. It allows for storytelling. I mean, and arguably you had some embarrassment of riches there on the West Coast, right? Because people like Vin Scully, people like Gil Hodges, people like John Miller, somebody we'd like to get on this show for some of his early pre-baseball exploits, calling North American Soccer League stuff. But I digress. Some of that is it's almost like lyrics, right? It's lyrical in what these broadcasters, in many respects, not only call, but have to kind of, shall we say, improvise during the shall we say, long dead spots when the game action can't carry it.
Absolutely. Well, I'll ask him if he'd be interested in coming on the show, because I think he would like the subject matter that you talk about on this show.
Well, he may be embarrassed from some of his North American Soccer League stuff on the old TVS television network, but we have the clips, and we'd certainly love to hear some of it for sure. But you could do a whole lot worse than people like John Miller. Enhancing your understanding of the game, because he still is today. He's frankly a modern day lyricist, I think, when it comes to calling baseball games, and very few like him. I agree wholeheartedly. He's a modern day lyricist in just about anything, including, I will say, grocery lists. It's surreal to me. We don't even have to touch on this whole aspect of things, but I have since, and actually because of my grandfather, developed a great friendship with this man who was the voice of baseball when I really started to love it. And so it's really, he can get into telling stories in any social situation. And I love the fact that his wife will be like, honey, come on, because he will, despite the fact that he calls games and tells stories all day long, he will still stand and tell you an hour's worth of great stories at the end of dinner, or, you can tell that he just loves it, and everybody around him clearly loves it. I love it. I never get tired of it. So it's really surreal when that voice is, calling to tell you something about the day's game, or just leaving a message. Just hearing that voice in my voicemail is like, even though it's a friend and I consider them to be kind of like family, it's this weird separation where just the voice detached from the human is still like this weird, it just brings all the feelings when I hear it. And I sent him a message one day, and I don't remember the context of it, but I said something to the effect of, you could read a grocery list and it would sound good, or, something to that effect. And I was busy working actually on this book, but I checked my messages later, and there was a message that there was no introduction, no anything. It just started out with broccolini, kombucha. He just started reading his actual grocery list. It's like, oh, that's amazing. It really actually does sound pretty great. So, I think that had a lot to do with my interest in that aspect of baseball and everything around it. Well, as we've digressed into the John Miller Appreciation Society, there's actually a reason here, though, because he was the forward writing of your previous work that I guess is sold out now. I guess you were talking about self-publishing. Maybe you quickly explain that work, because it does blend all of these topics that we've been talking about together, and then maybe we can use that as a segue to get into your current stuff that's coming out.
Well, sure. Yeah, I just that's actually a great segue, only because it's how I came to discover my interest in the All-American Girls stories, and then how this book came about. Some people on Instagram and different areas had been saying, or had been kind of commenting like, hey, you should put your baseball illustrations into a book, or you should do a book. And I thought that was really nice, but really I was like, yeah, right. I'm not going to create that work for myself. But I also had been doing some work in the animation industry, and there is an animation industry convention every November in Burbank. And I had committed myself to having a vendor table where I would sell my art. And it was coming up on that time. I was maybe a month or so out, and I had nothing. I just thought, I can't just stand there at an empty table with nothing. So I decided it would be a good thing to do to just throw all of my baseball cartoons and illustrations, everything into a book format. And I did that, and I printed, I don't remember how many I printed. I want to say maybe 400 to start, and just figured I'd bring 100 to the convention. And John was kind enough to write the foreword for that, because we had a shared appreciation also for Willard Mullen. And so that kind of prompted that. And he was nice enough also he's kind of a prolific Instagrammer, so he posted it, and that first print sold out, and then I did several after, and I probably would have even done more if I hadn't started working on this book. But in compiling the drawings to put together into that book and choosing, because I did a lot of drawing in the ballpark and, drawings inspired by stories of baseball, but then also drawings at baseball games and things like that. And going through all of those drawings, it was probably, it was a stack, I would say at least 6 or 8 inches thick. And I'm just kind of going through one by one. And I just had this weird realization about 2/3 of the way through this stack of drawings. And I don't know where it came from or why I realized it, but I just kind of thought, this is kind of weird. There are no drawings of women here. It's just drawing after drawing of men, and then also athletic men, which, no offense, but from an artistic standpoint is kind of boring. It's just like same angles and same, the lines and the actions of baseball are very exciting. But apart from drawing other fans around me in the stands, which I also started doing because that's part of it for me. I just love the vignettes happening around me and little snippets of conversations, and baseball is great for that too, because people are sitting still for a really long time. So it's easy to draw people around you. But other than fellow women fans around me, that was it. And I just thought it was kind of like, gosh, it's kind of weird. And I had a few experiences also right before that with men and base. Like, I was wearing a San Francisco Seals jacket in San Francisco, and an older gentleman he said something to the effect of like, young lady, do you even know the significance of what you're wearing, of that jacket? Do you even know what that is? Or are you just one of those, And I was like, I felt so kind of caught off guard, and had to kind of like jump to my own defense, but I was also kind of so surprised that I didn't really have an opportunity to do it. And then he got off the Muni car, and it was like, oh, I just felt so deflated. And that was just one thing that had kind of happened. So these things were sort of accumulating into this awareness. And I just thought there's got to be great stories of women in baseball, that I just don't know about, because we haven't existed as long as men and not had any participation whatsoever. I love baseball. I'm sure people before me love baseball so I just immediately went to like the only story that I really knew right off the bat, which is it's not totally fictional, but it's a fictional rendition of the story of these women of the All-American Girls Baseball League, which is A League of Their Own, the film. So I watched it, but then I kind of went into an internet rabbit hole and came out with just gold. It was like, oh my God, some of these stories of these women, one in particular who grew up in Chicago, and she had these stories about shining Al Capone's shoes and playing baseball with the boys. And there were all these common threads in these stories of these women growing up playing primarily with boys in sandlots or back alleys, and how they came to this league and then discovering each other, that I kind of found myself relating to, because growing up in Utah, I was already sort of a minority where we grew up because of the religious influence there. And then other interests I had. So I really kind of just I wasn't a tomboy. I wouldn't call myself a tomboy, but I was always more interested in the things that the boys were doing, and it was way more fun to me. And I guess because of the religious influence there, I don't know if there still is, but there definitely was when I was growing up, a real heavy emphasis on marriage and bearing children. And it was happening at a very early age for a lot of women there. That's a lot of my friends got married right out of high school. So that just was like, duh, I really pushed myself away from that. So the alternative of that was doing what a lot of guys around me were doing, which is snowboarding, four-wheel. I did a lot of snowboarding, just fun things that had nothing to do with that. So I guess I never realized how much I identified. I was starting to identify with these women. I never considered myself someone who really generally identified with women, and I sort of classified myself as that. And then as I started to identify with these stories of these women from long ago, I started to kind of realize how important that was for them to be playing with other women and to have found that camaraderie and the relatability with each other, particularly at such an unlikely time. And I just kind of started to wonder about myself and finding things about myself in these stories and realizing things about my own personal history and how all my heroes and influences were all men, and or not all, but I would say mostly. And so, yeah, it was just kind of a really cool opportunity for me to explore that. And I really dove in, and I just couldn't get enough of it.
Well, and pioneers at that too, right? As you go back into it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think Penny Marshall, the late Penny Marshall, and all the people involved in the production of A League of Their Own. Obviously, I think that is an on-ramp or an accessibility point for at least one, or if not more, generations about this league and this story, to the point where, it's also a statement on how entertainment, is kind of a news source or an education source for people. But irrespective of sort of that commentary, the reality is that whatever it takes, frankly, and it has been enlightening and an eye-opening for many people about this story that, frankly, a lot of people didn't even know about. The fact that there was a league for a number of years, not just in the war, but even after that period of time, that was completely stocked with women playing baseball, an historically male-dominated sport. Now, the reasons, we'll get into maybe some of it in a minute, but it's interesting how that period of time for many people was lost, forgotten, and arguably a lot of that sort of pioneering work and or endeavor gets lost to time as baseball, as the 50s and 60s moved on, reverted back to male chauvinism or whatever, dominance. We've talked a little bit about sort of the plight of women in baseball and being quote unquote relegated to softball and all that kind of stuff. But it's just interesting how your personal story, your personal maturation, if you will, and the identity or identifying with this story, I'm a guy, right? And worse, a middle-aged white guy, right? So not a lot of, but a sensitivity to other perspectives. And, growing up as a kid myself, playing baseball was just kind of one of those natural things that one did among, other sports and pursuits and stuff. But, if you're a woman, if you're a young lady and you're interested in sports, in many respects, you get shuffled off into these quadrants of what you're allowed to do. And baseball still, but yet for a brief period of time, wasn't an expectation. That's interesting to me, because why can't it be again? And why was it in the first place? And why couldn't it be one more time at least? I'm stumbling through something there. Help me find something in that stumbling.
No, well, what you said, you put it all precisely and insightfully, that that was the other sort of thing that I kind of stumbled into while writing this. I was so deeply involved in the stories of these women and the history and the fascination, just like you're describing, of this, and also as it sort of unfolded my own awareness, that it didn't really, I'm embarrassed to say, that question didn't really occur to me until I was well into my research and even starting to write, of wait a minute, why the hell why did this stop in 1954 and never happen again? There are some, some great experiments and attempts at things like this, like with the silver bullets and, things like that. But this, they barnstormed and played against men's teams or co-ed teams. And, that's an incredible thing, but it's a different thing. And, since Title IX's passing, other women's sports have developed into women's sports. There's women's tennis and there's women, and they've all developed into, there are stars in those sports. There are leagues, there are youth leagues there. They have developed into their own thing. And it was really interesting because as I was researching all of this and I had done a bunch of interviews and resourced archives and newspaper articles and all that. And my studio looked like the mind of a total creep or like something out of Homeland because I'm super analog when it comes to organizing things. So I had literally these like slips of paper with quotes and different things cut out and push pinned everywhere with like strings leading to things because I just needed to figure out how it was going to form into a narrative. And as I was doing this, I came across an article about the Women's World Cup, like the international competition, the Women's World Cup of Baseball and Team USA, and how this competition was taking place in the United States for the very first time. And I was like, well, this is a thing, and I clicked on this article. And so it was really interesting because then I kind of started following Team USA and the World Cup. But there was an article where a player was being interviewed and she was describing her experience as a baseball player and how every time she talks about it, and this is a sport that she's like invested so much of her life in and that she's playing on a professional level. It's not just like this thing she's trying, and how every time she explains that to somebody, they say back to her, "You mean softball?" And she'd say, "No, I played baseball." And they'd be like, "But you mean softball? Like, wait, you play softball though, right? Professionally?" Or, it was like this back and forth. And I read that part of that article right, honest to God, like an hour after I had push pinned this piece of conversation on the wall that came from a player by the name of Pepper Pear Davis, who said that she, along with pretty much every other former player of the All-American Girls League, just stopped talking about it. They just never talked about it because the conversation was like, people just didn't believe, they either didn't believe them, or her words were, they would say, "You mean softball?" And I would say, "No, I mean baseball." And they'd say softball. And I'd say, "No, baseball." And she's like, I couldn't carry my scrapbooks around with me on my back, so I just stopped talking about it. But it was almost verbatim. But the woman, Malika, this woman who plays for Team USA, in the article was saying this in 2018, and Pepper Pear was saying this about her experience in like the late 50s and early 60s. And it was just like, wait, why is this conversation still happening almost verbatim? And how can you explain the sort of arrested development of baseball? And, like I said, I never really played. So part of me is like, who am I? Why am I an authority here? But I just was so curious. And that's when I decided there should be an afterword to this book about the All-American Girls, because it still matters, and there are still girls and women playing baseball, and there are girls who want to play baseball. And these stories of these women are not just interesting and insightful and inspiring, but they're important for these people, or for girls or women who want to do anything, whether it's athletic or otherwise, but just to know that it happened in real life. And there's also a whole generation of girls who, it makes me feel so old to think that A League of Their Own is over 25 years old. But I've had the conversation with a lot of people, younger people and people my age, where I try to explain to them, they say, what is the book about? And I try to tell them, and then they kind of get this blank look on their face, and they say, well, have you seen the movie A League of Their Own? And so many of them retain that blank look on their face, like, no, or they say, oh, I've heard of it. Is that the one about the, So I think it's a good time. It's a good time to talk about it or share the stories again.
Well, but it's also the manner in which you present it, right, is very graphical and illustrative versus prose. Well, prose is in there, right? But it's not what one would normally expect to be sort of a traditional sort of nonfiction, heavily footnoted kind of thing, nor is it a traditional sort of oral history. We've seen a number of those there, and they're still, to their credit, a number of women who still in their 70s and 80s and even 90s who are still alive and kicking and celebrated, frankly, in a lot of major league and other sporting environments. But I guess it's also a credit to the fact that your skill set, right, being an illustrator and an artist, I guess, by trade, graphic design and all that, lends itself very well to storytelling and, frankly, gives maybe a whole sort of audience who wouldn't have the time or the wherewithal or the, I don't know, be able to pay attention, frankly, to reading prose versus a more, I guess, frankly, entertaining way to, if you will, educate on some history here, while also maybe giving a little alignment to the current struggles, I guess, of women trying to play baseball and prove themselves, strangely, that they have to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, like you said, I guess it's just, it is just my skill set naturally and how I do things and how I approach things. But, it's tough because not everybody learns the same way or is interested in the same things or retains information or is interested in things for the same reasons. But I myself, I don't know, I was one of those kids that I learned so much better. I was so much more interested if there was a picture with it, whatever the thing was, or I would make one. All my notes in high school were, mostly drawn and not written. But baseball itself and these stories and kind of going back in time, you can do so much with words, but a lot of people just, like you said, don't have the patience for a lot of words or can hold the interest. But baseball also is one of those things that when you really get into the clinical, detailed part, the academic aspect of baseball, you're entering into a whole new language that even people who love words don't really care to learn or know, or you're going to lose people real quick when you start going into the details of the game. Even myself, I love that stuff and I'll get interested, but that's why I love writers like Roger Angell or Roger Kahn, who, we know just passed away, because they focused on that real, the emotion, the sights, the smells, the sounds, the funny quips. So those are the words that interested me and still interest me. But even still, if you read like The Summer Game, which I'm reading again right now because I just love it and it gets me excited for spring training. But, even Roger Angell will go into some details of baseball that if you aren't a fan of baseball or you don't know about baseball, you're just going to drop off. And I really the story is about so much more than baseball. It's bigger than baseball. It's bigger than just women's history. It's bigger than sports. It's bigger than art. It's bigger than, I feel like it's so important that it's accessible to everyone, and anyone. And that being said, not just the visuals, but also the sort of digestibility of it. I love being able to pick up a book and open to any page and getting the gist of what it's about and maybe even laughing out loud for a minute or, just being able to pick up a page and read a little bit and enjoy it. But then if I have to put it down, I can. And even though this book follows sort of a linear narrative from beginning to end of the league, I didn't want it to be one of those things that felt like work. I wanted to do all the work. I don't want the reader to do the work. So, and baseball itself is also, can be very visual. There's a lot of exciting lines there. There's a lot of beautiful colors, particularly in the 40s and 50s. It was really fun to play with. There's a lot of beautiful typography and lettering and clothing. Oh my God. And the uniforms and it's just so visually rich, and that era particularly. So I don't know. I just felt like it'd be fun. And, the entertaining medium, A League of Their Own is a great testament to that these women did not talk about it. Most people, even their own families, did not know these women played baseball until Penny Marshall made A League of Their Own. I've heard from a lot of people say, I didn't know my mother played professional baseball until she told us we were going to see the movie. And she said, I did that. That was me, and I think that's pretty incredible. But, so what Penny Marshall did was basically gave life to a lot of these women and their legacy, but it's a Hollywood film and it had to be entertaining. And so you can see the power in that, however detail-oriented or accurate it is. It's not completely historically accurate, but it served a wonderful purpose. And I think that's the more important aspect of the whole story.
All right, what's this? The Arizona Office of Tourism Spring Training. Oh my God. Hey, this spring, follow your favorite baseball teams to Arizona for Cactus League Spring Training. Amazing weather and landscapes, exciting outdoor adventure, incredible food. Arizona. It's the perfect home base for baseball fans. Follow your favorite baseball teams to Arizona for Cactus League Spring Training. 10 stadiums, 15 Major League Baseball teams, and 75-degree temperatures. Awesome. And all 10 stadiums are in the greater Phoenix area, all within 50 miles of the city. Meet players, get autographs before the games, and just enjoy an old-fashioned ballpark experience in beautiful preseason weather down in Arizona. Check out amazing restaurants and bars nearby, including tons of craft breweries like Four Peaks, Angel's Trumpet Ale House, and Goldwater Brewing Company. Enjoy live music from local and national artists, and explore museums featuring everything from native heritage to modern art to musical instruments from around the world and more. Arizona is known for its incredible landscapes too, as well as thrilling outdoor adventures. So hit the road and explore Arizona's urban centers or ghost towns or artsy communities or quirky outposts. You can hike, you can bike, you can take Jeep tours, hot air balloon rides, skydiving, jet skiing, or just taking in a good old-fashioned sunset. No matter what you love to do, Arizona has you covered. Check out must-see destinations from your bucket list like the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, Horseshoe Bend, and even the great Old West city of Tucson. Bringing the kids along for spring training? Hey, Arizona's a fantastic destination for families, too. Family-friendly resorts and hotels offer plenty of fun for kids of all ages, from water parks to horseback rides to games and activities. Arizona also has tons of stuff for kids to do and see, like wildlife parks and science museums, aquariums, and even dude ranches. So what are you waiting for? Plan now for your spring training getaway at visitarizona.com/spring training. That's visitarizona.com/spring training. Hey, and don't forget, send us a postcard. How did you translate that then? Obviously, you clearly understand the Hollywood sort of fantasy machine, right? But how do you then get into creating this work that has, that is accurate but also entertaining, right? The reality is you don't have as much creative license maybe in that story, especially as you learn more about it and recognize how important on many levels the story was beyond just a movie, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there is a lot of freedom in illustration. So where I stayed, it had to be accurate. It had to be historically accurate, and not. I couldn't inject opinion in any way. There are some difficult things to touch on in the overall story of the league, like racism and of course sexism and misogyny, and a lot of the stories that the newspaper articles about these women. Sometimes I'd come across them and just be like, "Oh my God, wow!" But
yeah, there's some real hardships there, right? I mean, you don't sugarcoat it, even though it's in delightful illustrative form, right? That's part of the story.
Yeah, and I didn't want to shy away from any of that. It just didn't feel right, and I couldn't. It's an important part of the story, and there are a couple of things that I would have loved to have touched on that I didn't shy away from out of because I was scared. It just wasn't. It didn't fall in line, or it wasn't pertinent to the way that I was presenting this story, or truth or accuracy. There's a lot of things that are sort of left to interpretation or that weren't talked about, and I didn't want to go with those things. I just wanted to go with what has actually been said, what has actually been printed, what was actually played, how people actually reacted to it. So there's that, and so we stayed. I guess if you just read the manuscript and you didn't see any of the illustrations, I feel like it would be pretty dry. And my initial manuscript was not really like that. And thank God for great editors who are like, we don't need to throw around like all these alliterative fun things, because my illustration style is a lot more fun. And there's a lot of fun to be had too. There are a lot of hardships, but there's also a lot of things that we can sort of laugh at or poke fun at, or just a lot of wonderful and often humorous aspects and stories within the story. There's a lot of, I don't know about freedoms, because I also wanted to be very historically accurate with the drawings. I wanted to make sure that the uniforms were accurate, the graphics, down to even, like, as silly as it is, the hair, advertisements, things of the era. I wasn't about to draw, like, I saw an illustrated book recently about a story in baseball, and I won't tell or hint at what it was, but there was an illustration of a girl watching a baseball game on TV, but the story took place, like, the age that she would have been was like the early 40s. And I was just like, did anyone look into this? Like, it's not that big of a deal, but it's also, like, who's going to notice that? But at the same time, I was like, no one was watching a baseball game nationally televised in 1941, anyway, whatever. It's a minute detail, but I wanted to make sure those things were accurate, but then also there's so much room to have fun with visual interpretation of things, and to take a part of a story and play with it visually. So I guess that's where the entertainment or the fun aspect was able to come in, is just that you can do that with illustration. And it was really fun to just at certain points be like, wait a minute, this is my book. I can throw in a nod to my grandpa or my dad or my, I can throw in little Easter eggs to my family in these drawings, because it's my book and it's not going to ruin anything. So yeah, that part was really fun.
So, I mean, what do you discover? I mean, the name of the book is, you specifically say The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So clearly a lot of this is focused on not only their stories, plural, but their story collectively. What is it about these women? And maybe as an aside to an answer to that is, why do you think that a lot of these women, say when the movie came out, or maybe even afterwards, were so, I don't know, reluctant or modest maybe about having been in this league? Was it sort of the greatest generation thing? It was just kind of what you did, and it was kind of like a war effort thing, and we were just, it's our little way of, or I mean, why such modesty and or reticence maybe to talk about all this, and maybe how does that juxtapose maybe about sort of what is it about these women that was so amazingly special? Because it's clearly that they were.
Yeah, well, I think there's like a few components to that. I think one that is just kind of sort of not exciting, or obvious, but is that I think a lot of them just didn't really consider the significance of what they did. They just they played baseball and they got paid for it, which was like a dream come true for most, if not all of them, at a time when women just didn't get to do that. And a lot of them made more money than their fathers even. They made more money than they would have working in war factories. And that was just sort of a dream come true. And then it ended. And they just kind of went on with their lives. And I don't know that any of them really sat down and thought, we were the first women to ever play in a professional women's baseball league. And I think also because when the war came and went, women played an entirely different role during the war. And then as soon as the war ended, it was kind of like, okay, everyone resume your positions, which didn't exactly happen because a lot of women had now been out of the home and sort of proved themselves either to others or to themselves and continue down that path. But in general, there was like a big sort of, I guess, propagandized, if you will, push back into the home. There was sitcoms and magazines and all, the whole image we have of the 1950s housewife pushing the vacuum delightfully, that was the sort of the norm. And so I think there was also, again, like that whole disbelief issue. And then also, I think a lot of self-consciousness, because it wasn't, if you were to say in the late 50s that you played professional baseball as a woman, I don't know that many people would react with like, oh, wow, that's amazing. It was sort of like a lot of them said there was this stereotype, there was a whole social lesbianism scare, which is hilarious and ridiculous, but with women going into the military to serve during World War II and then beyond, and so women athletes were sort of viewed and slandered as this sort of, you must be like a trash talking, tobacco spitting, truck driving, just basically all the awful things about not being feminine in those days. And so I think there was a reluctance really to talk about it just because of the social norms at the time and the reactions to that. Even though, there was nothing that they, even though the league was sort of this ideal picture of femininity out of Wrigley's creation, because not that many people knew about it, you couldn't, it was like just, there was so much explaining to do that they just didn't. But I think that, the movie came out at a time when people were realizing how incredible it was.
I also think, I think there also is, there's also just a mountain of double standards too, right? I mean, I'm sure as part of that either implied or obvious sexism, right? Things like how frivolous is it for quote unquote women to be playing baseball when we're at a time of war and all that, and or the the charm school process and the restrictive lists of what ladies are allowed or not allowed to wear. I mean, yet you could also take all of those seemingly negative, overtones and actually translate them into empowering things. And they are different and unique and breakthrough. And they were contributing to war, bonding and distraction from, I mean, a lot of positives to all that stuff too. But it's also got to be very interesting to have been an actor in all of that, to be on the field, to be a chosen woman to play, and to, it almost seems like it's got to be sort of a tug of emotions, because you're doing things for various reasons on the positive side, but also being maybe derided on certain respects on the negative side. So a very interesting sort of dynamic sort of seems to come out of all of this. And I don't think it's obvious to most people who kind of know about this for the first time.
Right. Yeah. Well, you touched on an interesting thing. Someone recently made a comment on, well, I don't know how recently it was, but they made a comment on an Instagram post of mine saying something to the effect of, like, it was there's a Women in Baseball Week that is like a social media thing that was, I believe, instigated by the International Women's Baseball Center. But they made a comment to the fact that, they couldn't, like, there shouldn't be a Women in Baseball Week. It should just be acceptable all the time. And how can we celebrate this whole thing that forced women to play in skirts? And, and I understand what they were saying, but it was also like, that's the reason it worked. At the time, you could not have a league of women playing hardball in front of and get the support of not just a crowd, but a town, a city, having radio broadcasts. I mean, it was tremendously popular for a lot of these people, spending their entire days working in war production factories. And then the fact that it succeeded beyond the war was a testament to the success of it and the popularity of it. And it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been this sort of delightfully, whimsically feminine, this picture of femininity. It just wouldn't have worked at the time. I mean, that wouldn't pass now, but if you consider the social standards and the social norms of the time, it had to happen. So it was either that or no women's baseball. And you kind of have to go with the fact that that's part of what made it possible. Wearing lipstick on the field, that's part of what made it possible. And the other interesting side of that is that, they went through all this and they kind of said, well, it was either wear that skirt or go home. And I'm not going to go home if I get to play professional baseball. But like I said, these women were making real great salaries. They were making more money than minor league men's baseball teams were making. And they had these insanely rigorous schedules where they're playing 6 games a week and a doubleheader. So they basically had one day off a week. And they're traveling by bus. They're traveling all night and then playing a doubleheader the next day. I mean, they just had these insane playing schedules. So they never had time to spend the money they were making. And a lot of them would either put it in savings or send it home to be put aside. And that money gave this whole, I think the league, they said over the course of its, from 1943 to 1954, there were a little over 600 women that played in that span of time. So you think over 600 women had, travel experience, experience away from home. They went all over the country, Canada. A lot of them went to Cuba. And then they had money that women at the time weren't making, and they were able to squirrel it away. So this whole group of women had access to higher education and things that most women at the time didn't even have access to. So it perpetuated beyond the baseball. And there's this whole, league of women that not only played professional sports, but then went on to do things that were like so unlikely for women at the time. One woman became Canada's first female sportscaster, broadcaster. A lot of them went on to coach and then passed that knowledge along to other young girls, or, become first CEOs or engineers or doctors, or, things that just were not common, that women didn't have access to. So I think that's another pretty incredible ripple effect of the whole thing that just kind of perpetuated, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, and I think aside from, say, the standout individual female athletes, say, even before this time, say, like the Babe Didriksons of the world, this is, I think through the historical lens, right, this is truly the first, real sustained breakthrough on the professional level for women in sports in this country. And, I think a lot of people can point to this period of time and this particular league as the germ of much of what has come since. I'm sure it's an indirect and messy sort of lineage, right? But there are, frankly, very strong kernels of things like Title IX and the success of the U.S. national women's soccer team, which finally the men, well, not finally, I think the men have always been behind them in terms of like equal pay and all these kinds of things that, the success we've talked about with Molly Kazmer, who was one of the pioneers of the Women's Basketball League back in the late 70s. And now what's become from that of the WNBA, still struggling, and it's not hugely remunerative and making a ton of money for people, but it's been around for 20 some odd years. I mean, that's a huge, step forward and then some from where things have been. So I guess my question to you, there is a question. While these women, are absolutely have to be seen as pioneers on a number of different fronts, it also feels to me, and some of this comes through very much in the pages of your book, it also seems like they were having a hell of a lot of fun, too.
Yeah, they still are. A lot of them. Yeah,
I mean, I get the sense that there are probably worse ways to pioneer things. Play baseball professionally in the United States.
Yeah, and there are a lot worse stories of women pioneering to have to write about and illustrate. That's for sure. It's to touch on the growth of women's sports that you're talking about. I think part of the sort of sense of duty and purpose of creating this book, and then also the fun, is that the development and the growth and if anything's going to happen or grow or become anything, I personally, this is just my take on it, but I think the most important element of that is just the knowledge of possibility. Because, I mean, sadly, Kobe Bryant and his daughter passing away recently, but because of that, I was seeing videos of his daughter playing, and I thought she was going to bring a whole new level to women's basketball, I think, at some point. And it's a shame to have lost that. But the point is seeing that happen and grow and bubble, and having people provide opportunities, of course, or getting breaks or having to work for an opportunity and then getting it. But the point is just seeing the possibility, knowing the possibility where, I think the WNBA may be struggling because it's just it was just conceived of not that long ago. But having young girls today who it's there. It's not even like, I wonder if there will be professional women's basketball. Yeah, it's struggling, but they see it and they know it's there and they can see it whenever they want, and they have heroes and they know it's possible. And when you plant that seed of possibility so early on, it just eliminates that whole wall or worry of impossibility. And then you just don't even have to worry about that, and you could just go for it. And you never even wonder if it's worth your time or worth your efforts or worth channeling your skills or your focus, because it's just there and it's possible, and that's a channel, and you can do it. So that being said, I think that's, part of the reason why these women had so much damn fun. It was completely impossible. It was like someone waving a magic wand and saying, okay, your dreams are now possible. A lot of these women, it was like they grew up just like a lot of little boys fantasize about, like, one day I'm going to be Mickey Mantle and I'm going to, it was a lot of these women's dreams as a young girl to play professional baseball. And some of them even verbalized that and were just met with like, okay, honey, a pat on the head or being laughed at, or, there's no such thing. Right. And they just kind of like went on to do other things because it was just completely impossible. And then all of a sudden, like overnight, it was not only possible, but they were doing it. And so I think they really did a great job of living in the moment and soaking it in, and not letting something like having to wear a skirt or lipstick get in the way, because it was like, I'm not going to pass this up, and they have the greatest stories. They get each other laughing. I mean, the reunions I've been to, it's just such a privilege to even be in the room and witness their relationship with one another and the stories they have and the camaraderie they still have. It's kind of like time has never passed when you see them together, which is really fun. So, I think that just that possibility for them made it a lot of fun, I'm sure. I can't even imagine. I mean, particularly when women were not really like leaving home, or, you're just kind of working on the farm or staying, living at home. So what an adventure that must have been. But it's a lot of fun now. I mean, sadly, a lot of them are getting older, and several of the women I've interviewed have passed away since I've interviewed them. So their stories are getting fewer and farther between, but thankfully, with the movie and the awareness of them, a lot of their stories were recorded. My book is not the first to take note of their stories, but it's great that we have record of them and that they've shared some of them because they're really, really great stories.
Look, we're living in an era, and now I'm starting to feel old too, but I mean, I listen to a bunch of podcasts, Gilbert Gottfried in particular, and they talk about old show business stories and all that kind of stuff. And they were
fun.
They were lamenting a couple of weeks ago the fact that not only do not people remember like who Johnny Carson was, they don't even remember now who David Letterman was or is.
Oh my God!
Exactly.
That is I mean, so painful to me.
Well, me too. But it does speak to. I mean, we're talking about a movie that came out in the '90s, right? So there's maybe a passing understanding of that film, or knowledge of it, right? So this is an important story, and God forbid that this is an excuse for people to discover it or rediscover it. And I wish you good luck with it.
Well, thank you. And you're right there. So that's one reason why I know you're calling it your silly podcast, but I think it's wonderful. And I love that you're doing it because in baseball, and I guess, you could say entertainment or Hollywood or something like Johnny Carson, these are things that, I mean, not only are they just so enriching and wonderful and entertaining, but I think that these stories and sort of the history of it and the golden ages of these things not only are such a part of American identity as it was developed, but they were a huge part of identity in general. There was a time when baseball was literally the common language. Like no matter where you came from, or if you were an immigrant, there's so many stories about coming to America as an immigrant. And like, if you wanted to communicate with people, you learned baseball or people would talk about it when they saw each other at the butcher, or there's like stories even of men coming across, guys sitting in Jeeps during World War II. And it was like, they'd be skeptical of one another. And the only way you really knew is like, how's the home run race going between, they would talk baseball. It's like, okay, you're legit. You're not going to shoot me. It's like, that's extreme, but I think those things are so important to hold on to because as we move into like money and statistics and all the parts of baseball that they are interesting, and they're interesting to a lot of people, and they're more interesting to other people than myself. But to me, that is not the heart and soul of what makes it the national pastime.
All right. Our thanks to Anika. Fantastic conversation and an awesome book. Please, by all means, run, don't walk, and get yourself a copy of The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. It's fantastic. You will enjoy it thoroughly. I don't care if you're young or old, a male, a female, interested in baseball or not. It's a fantastically done book. And you will see some visuals that we will do on our social media this week, as well as on our website, of course, at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode with Anika Orrock, and you will find some examples of such. You will also find a convenient link to the book on Amazon. If you're listening to this show on the week that we dropped this episode on March 3rd, the Kindle version is available to you now. Through that link. It is published by Chronicle Books in San Francisco. If you're listening to this episode March 10th and beyond, and we do have a lot of folks that like to listen to these episodes out of pattern or perhaps sort of in an archive kind of way as they discover the show and they go deep, that book then now is available to you also in hard copy version for you right this moment. Also at Amazon.com. And again, you'll find a link to that from our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com or wherever good books are found. If you want to buy it through your independent bookstore or you want to go on the Chronicle Books website or however you get a copy, it doesn't really matter to me. It certainly matters to Anika, and we encourage you to get a copy because it's just that damn good. We know you'll enjoy it, and please indeed, if you do purchase a copy and you do love it as much as we have, please let us know, and I'm sure Anika would be tickled pink to know that you enjoyed it as well. And you can contact her directly if you'd like. You can follow her on her website. It's AnikaOrrock.com. I'll spell it for you. It's Anika Orrock, O-R-R-O-C-K, AnikaOrrock.com. You can follow her on social media, of course. You'll find her on Instagram at Anika Drawls. That's ANIKA DRAWLS. It's also the same handle on Twitter, Anika Drawls, at Anika Drawls. And on Facebook, you'll find her at facebook.com/art of Anika. And let's see, I know she'll be doing some promotion. I think she mentioned that she'll be at the New York Yankees game in New York City on May 5th. I think that's in conjunction with some All-American Girls Professional Baseball League reunion type stuff. I know there's a reunion coming up in Chicago at some point during the summer. I'm sure there's a bunch of other things, but I'm sure you'll find her and copies of the book floating around as the promotion starts to kick in, and we're happy to be part of that mix for sure. Let's see, what else? We also want to encourage you when you're on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, not only to relive and enjoy this episode and see all the great imagery that we've conjured up to promote it, but also all of our other episodes, 150 some odd shows and interviews we've done already. Geez, it's almost 3 years now. They're all there for you, and if you want to, download them or share them with your friends or whatever, by all means, they're right there, and you can enjoy each and every one of them at your leisure, and please enjoy. And of course, you'll find our social media feeds and all that kind of stuff there too. But if you want to just get those directly, that's on Twitter. You'll find us at Good Seats Still. On Instagram, you'll find us at Good Seats Still Available. You'll find a little page devoted to us on Facebook as well. Let's see. You'll find a link on our website to our weekly newsletter. If you want to get that, just sign up there. And of course, if you want to send us some email, you can do that too. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Our thanks, of course, to our pal Jerry Payne and Jerry Payne Productions for editing all of our stuff and making us sound like we're somewhat intelligent. And let's see. I guess that's it for this week. But before we leave you, we're going to, of course, try to keep you sort of in the mood of women's baseball. And we're going to, of course, go back to perhaps the seminal movie that kind of introduced and reminded people, for those who forgot, that this league actually existed, this All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And of course, that was the film from the early 90s, A League of Their Own, which we kind of referenced, I'm sure, a couple of times in our conversation with Anika. And I think most people remember from the movie, during the closing credits, the Madonna hit song. I think it went to number 1, as a matter of fact. This used to be My Playground, I believe it was called. But of course, because of a contractual snit, it was not even on the soundtrack. And, I think a lot of people left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths because it was a great song and it was well positioned in that film, but it wasn't on the soundtrack, and you couldn't have that as part of the album. So that kind of didn't make any sense. But arguably, and maybe not so arguably, the better song, frankly, was this one that we're going to leave you with. And that's the Carole King penned and sung song, Now and Forever. It's a beautiful tune, and I think encapsulates the entire sort of zeitgeist of not only the movie, but certainly the women behind this league. And we leave you now with Carole King from the soundtrack, the actual soundtrack of A League of Their Own, Now and Forever. And we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.